is important.
There it
isn't
is.
it?
The audio is
Yes.
active. I can see the little blips going. And with that, that means that we are currently live on Twitch. Hello and welcome to Max and Ben Save the World, a men's mental health podcast. I'm Ben.
I'm Max. We're so glad you're here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. Today's topic is how to be a good man socially. We've been going through the aspects of health, at least a made-up list of 5 that we decided sound really good.
Yes.
Before we started this season.
Mental, physical, spiritual, and now social health.
Yeah. Culminating in our final episode, which will be about holistic health, viewing the whole person. With that said, we're very glad that you're here. Both Max and I are licensed therapists in our home state. However, because of that, we want to recognize right away at the start that this isn't a replacement for therapy. We're absolutely advocates for therapy and think that you should go. It's a wonderful place to get to know yourself, your own goals, and to focus on your own future. However, this is meant to be a place where 2 people that happen to be therapists talk about mental health and men's mental health and focus on conversations that we think will be helpful to you listeners. And so we hope that whatever we say today is inclusive and inviting enough that people from all sides of political spectrums, belief systems, social statuses can come together. And we encourage you, if you find that you hear some things that are maybe more difficult to wrestle with in our podcast, that you stick along with us. We are glad to have you here, and we would be open to hearing feedback as well as having a dialogue with people that are earnestly engaging with us in the attempt at becoming the best version of ourselves that we can be. With that said, Max, I think that you have a recognition.
Yeah, for our recognition today, we would like to recognize all victims of gun violence in the United States. Over the past many months, there's been a lot of deaths that I think we both feel are very unnecessary. And we just want to offer our condolences and really hoping that things are going to get better in terms of that. So we're going to offer just a few moments of silence, and then we'll get back to the podcast. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's jump into today's topic. We're talking about social well-being. And so I want to be the typical podcasters and get out right away. You know, old man yells at cloud. The third spaces are gone. We don't have anywhere to go.
But Ben, what's a third space?
A third space is a space other than your workplace or your home where you gather socially with other people.
Dude, are you saying that your workplace is your first place and your home is your second place?
I think that for many Americans, they conceptualize their workplace first and foremost, especially given the fact that many Americans, upon first meeting one another, one of the very first questions that they ask is, what do you do? With the implication being for work.
What do you do for work? Yes. I think there's been some shifts there. But
yeah, there certainly has.
So a third place is the other than home and work place that you might go to.
Mm-hmm. Third spaces can look like a lot of things, and we'll get into the specifics of those first. But I want to acknowledge right up front at the podcast that if you are somebody that is rolling your eyes at, oh my gosh, these guys are talking about how we don't get together enough, and they're saying we should go to third spaces more, stick with us. I think that by the end of the podcast, hopefully we'll have some conversations that are helpful to you. And I think I want to establish my reasoning a bit for why we're talking about social health in the order that we're going in. And that a little bit is the idea that I think coming from a therapy mindset, I'm approaching in a lot of ways the conversations that we have on this podcast from the perspective that our listeners are by themselves. They're, most likely, at least when I listen to podcasts, I'm in the car or I'm, working on a project or something on my computer and I've got it going on in the background, or I'm painting something and I'm listening to it. And for me, and I think a lot of people, podcasts are individual experiences. And so from a pragmatic lens, as somebody that wants to be as helpful as they can be, I think that laying out the idea that we need social spaces, places that are beyond just our place of vocation or work and our home for us to be as socially rounded as we can. And I would also like to make the argument that we talk so much about how we need third spaces, and so many of these self-help gurus online and things will harp on how you just need to find a group of people that do this thing that you do, and that'll magically fix all of your problems. And that's why I think that another important focus of our conversation today, coming later up, is how to have individual relationships that are deep and meaningful, outside of romantic relationships. With that being said, I think that we will get to a quote from Steve Jobs later. But one that I encountered this week was this notion that Steve Jobs and many others have had. You can find quotes from all sorts of these successful CEOs, which again, in our American culture, we tend to place on these pedestals in places where their mouthpieces are amplified, and we can hear their perspectives on success, right? There's all sorts to that. Anyway, one of the things that I found impressive in looking for good quotes for this week's podcast was one from Steve Jobs that really spoke to this idea that everything that we do, everything that we work towards and we innovate on, and we produce comes from the traditions of other people. We're standing on the shoulders of others in so many different ways. And one of the things that I would say from like a humanist perspective is that's one of the things, this idea of collective knowledge and the ability to pass it along to other people, especially outside of family groups, is one of the things that separates human beings as a sentient thing, right? We don't quite have a fully working definition scientifically or philosophically of what it is to be conscious and sentient. But one of the things that are certainly special, I would say, from my personal perspective, about human beings is the fact that we pass knowledge to one another. And we share in grand projects that are bigger than ourselves, and look across human history to things like the pyramids. Those don't get done by a single guy in his backyard. That took a lot of people, right?
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, I'm very sure about that.
I think going off of what Ben said, also, I have met many people in my career and my lifetime who really define the meaning of life as connection. That is actually the reason they feel, like they're on this earth is, the connection that I have with other people. That's the meaning that I gain. And I think that's pretty profound.
Yeah.
I think also speaks to the importance of social well-being in your life.
Yeah. And I think to speak to that a little bit and to go into your tangent with you a bit, or to take a tangent from you, is that I think that there's some level of truly that is one of the meanings of life that I can really get behind. And I think that is because in so many ways, I think that especially as I pursue artistic pursuits individually myself, I find so often, I run into that, I think, it's often attributed to Shakespeare, but I'm pretty sure he never said it. But this idea that there's no new stories. They've already been told. You can't come up with a new story to write. You won't paint a new painting. Everything has been done before. And I think that in a world where that is somewhat true, in a lot of ways, one of the things, you can see in all sorts of ways in your life, whether you're reading literature from, how life was in the 1800s or all the way to today, people have interpersonal connections that are deep and meaningful with one another. They form bonds in family groups and outside of them that cause them to do things that we would consider extraordinary. And I think one of those interesting things is that in a world where, all the stories have already been written, nobody has had the same friendship that you have with the people that you have met. And nobody has the same relationships that you get to have. I've encountered, this way of viewing the world or the universe as human beings being an expression of the universe, conscious of itself and observing itself. And if that is what we are, then how wonderful is it that you got to be the one that gets to experience all of these people that you get to meet in your lifetime.
You know, Ben, this is actually bringing me back to our last episode when I talked about the Gaia hypothesis and this idea that the Earth is like one living kind of being, where all the organisms are kind of like together as one weird non-sentient sentience. I mean, what you're saying is very much like this collective, experience of being human. It's foundational to our human experience, and I think it's very Jungian, the collective unconscious, the idea that we're all kind of together, and that matters. But I think that when I think about social well-being, I do think about like the male loneliness, kind of epidemic, and I do think that third places are totally a really good solution for that. But I think that there are so many men and young men, boys today, who just don't feel connected. That there's not really anyone in their life that they feel good about being around. Sometimes I'll look at like school shooters. I know we did our moment of silence earlier, and I will think, wow, this person didn't seem connected at all to anyone or anything in many ways. And that I don't know exactly each shooter's story, right? But I do think that connection is good for a healthy person. And when I see people in therapy, if someone has a really resilient, kind of like social group that they've been friends with for a long time, I think I absolutely tick that in like this is a protective factor.
Yeah.
People are, going to be taking care of this person. They're going to be checking in on this person. Very simply, like 2 heads are better than one, or 5 heads are better than one, at the very least.
Yeah. And I think to speak to that across that is one of the strengths of humanity. Some of the oldest records that we have of human remains are of a man that has a leg injury that clearly would have disabled him from being capable of taking in enough, of collecting enough food to survive. And so we can glean from that, anthropologists and paleontologists have gleaned from that as the oldest that we have human bones that we found, we also have evidence that human beings took care of one another, even when somebody wasn't contributing as much to the group as they used to. Well, and that's impressive.
Something else that comes to mind is very old human stories, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Sure.
I mean, I think about Gilgamesh and Enkidu. It's they were rivals, but then they were friends. A really foundational friendship, and that a story about friendship is one of the oldest stories in existence. I mean, I think that means something.
Yeah, certainly. All of that said, we think that it'd be important to talk about, like, okay, so say I am somebody that wants to find a group. I think that there's all sorts of advice out there, and there's some level of personal commitment that has to be made of, okay, what is it that you're interested in? What are the things that you enjoy? And there's something also to be said while we're on that vein of, if there's even something that you think could be interesting to you, and that the people there would be interesting to you, I would encourage you to try out that rock climbing group that gets together that you see flyers for at your gym, or check out that the Sunday open shoot at your local archery range, or go see what's going on with hobbyist roboticists at your local makerspace. And speaking, I'm trying to come up with examples that aren't true to my own life, so I'll just rattle off the ones that are true to my own life. Find a group of people to play Magic the Gathering with. Find a group of people to paint little miniatures and push them around on a board, and do that.
Ben, if we keep talking about Magic, one day the viewers will demand that we play Magic.
Yeah, we'll have to have like a Magic stream or a Magic episode or something like that. Certainly. Maybe we'll have to do that as like a sub-goal or something someday.
Here's what I would ask, Ben. Let's say, someone is watching this, they're like, okay, Max and Ben are probably right, 3rd place, pretty cool. I even like Magic the Gathering, but, what do I do when I get there? I'm just very nervous about, going to see other people. What would I do when I get there?
Yeah, I think that in situations like this, right, we don't all have the same experiences around what it means to learn how to be in group, right? I think that this is one of the strengths of being in extracurriculars when you're young, right? It's one of those benefits that comes with, like, playing baseball on your elementary school sports team does not hundreds of MLB players create, but it does make a contingent of people that have all taken those first steps in how being in a group works. And so for me, rooted in my own personal experience, I think that I really want to answer that question with the well, just do what you would do your first day on a new team, right? But not everybody has had that experience. And so I think that a more rudimentary way of approaching it is recognizing that fear, right? I think that one of the things that our society does, especially to men, is tells them that negative emotions are meant to be tossed away. They're meant to be not felt. You're supposed to ignore them, rub some dirt in it, push them down, or it's, if there is enough social justification, you're allowed to let them out in an extremely large way, and there's no in between. And I think that actually, if we're being our healthiest self, is allowing ourselves to feel that emotion on the car ride over to that new thing. Say I've never done, and I'm going to use Magic the Gathering as an example, so it's easier for me to say all of this without having to think about the metaphor. But say I don't have a group of people to play this game that I just got into and I'm interested in. I don't have a group of people to play that with. And so what am I going to do? At my local game store, I see that every Friday they go and play. Mm-hmm. And so I think that being an emotionally responsive person and being responsible with our emotions as a man, right? Feel that emotion in the car ride over. Feel it in the parking lot. Feel it as you walk through the doors. Recognize that that is what it is, that you're feeling anxiety, you're feeling fear, right, of social rejection, you're feeling fear of lack of competence, which results in social rejection, right? And I think in a lot of ways, I'm actually trying hard to conceptualize. I would love to empathize further if there's other examples that somebody has that I haven't thought of. But to me, I think the biggest, scariest part of that is social rejection. And so just recognizing that, whoa, I'm feeling big things about that. And to me, I think that one of the things, I'm trying to remember what modality of therapy I'm even drawing from, but I'm sure it's one of the 3-letter ones that ends in a T that says...
Isn't that all of them?
Isn't that all of them? There's ones that are 4 letters and don't end in T that are really popular right now, EMDR.
I'm sorry, it's
but yes, most of them. It's a DBT.
There are quite
CBT.
A few three-letter and in T modalities.
But anyway, also important to recognize when we're feeling those feelings, and you say, "Okay, I'm recognizing them. What do I do with that?" Is telling yourself that you can be wrong. Your brain doesn't have to be correct that it's worth being this scared. Yeah. Right? And you could be wrong. And just admitting to oneself, I find for me, as a more logical thinker, right, I tend to really want to lean on this, and I think that there's a double edge to that sword. I'll also say, without going too far, that you also can't logic yourself out of a panic attack. I know from personal experience, right? You can tell yourself all you want, the repeated mantra in your head.
You're not going to just suddenly die. Nothing bad is going to happen.
Right? You can rationalize all you want that there isn't actually a lion running after you when your boss sends you an email. And part of just accepting those emotions is just accepting that you do feel those. And whether you understand where they're coming from or not, man, it sucks. I don't like feeling it right now.
And
it's an okay thing to feel.
Obviously, when you are having a panic attack, there's ways you can ground yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Just
absolutely.
Focusing on what each of your senses are seeing and such. Maybe continuing conversation with someone.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, go on.
Anyway, I think that we'll find as we go through the rest of what we're going to talk about here with how to be a good member of a group. One of those protective factors for oneself around feeling that social anxiety is having that congruence of self. Now, I'm pretty sure that is Viktor Frankl talked about being the authentic self. Right?
That was Rogers.
Really? I could have sworn it was Viktor Frankl's authenticity. Well, I think authenticity comes up a lot. But I think that I'm drawing from Viktor Frankl's conversations on authenticity when I say that if you are going with the intent of being a good member of the group, it's easier for you to not be afraid of the social ramifications of screwing up because you're trying your best. And if you're going in with the genuine desire to treat everyone else like they're trying their best, they're more likely to treat you like you're trying your best. And not knowing where you're supposed to set your dice, or not knowing, where's the socially acceptable place to put down my playmat, is more acceptable in a group of people to someone when someone is being earnest in their attempt to recognize that the purpose of the group, oftentimes, like for these third spaces, like if we're going to get together to play a game, is for everyone to have fun, right? That doesn't necessarily always mean for me to win, right? Everyone having fun means something slightly different than that.
And of course, there's a lot of times that guys get competitive. And maybe they haven't made a lot of friends. They go to an event and they want to win. And, winning is fun. I think that being honest, accurate, and fair and authentic when you come to a new social gathering is minimum just like, hey, you're probably going to make some friends. People will think that you're a decent person. And, that's a lot to ask for now these days, it seems.
And I think organically, to just put a pin in a through line that we can go to the second half of this conversation, is if you're interested in that, like, say, like, Magic the Gathering is a good example, but there are many like this. Archery, was one that I just mentioned before. Gym, whatever. You start going to this group and you find other people that also enjoy trying to win and trying to be their best. Those tend to be the people, to make a Dragon Ball Z metaphor, those are often where you're going to find the Gokus and Vegetas, the Gokus to your Vegetas, to use an Old Testament metaphor, where the iron will sharpen the iron, in that the best you, right, if you're going to get good at this thing that we're all doing together, is going to have the genuine pursuit of finding other like-minded individuals who will train as hard as they can against you in an effort of being as civil and fair and friendly as possible. Because remembering, even if it's only 1%, it's still on top of everything. The relationship matters more. The friendship matters more. The pursuit of having fun and getting better together matters more than this one individual win. You'll find that that's where the best competitors are made, right? Yeah. Any skill like that is often bettered.
Yeah.
By having rivals
in a group,
friendly rivals.
Yes.
The Gary Oak to your Ash Ketchum.
Not that we're not rivals in Magic at all.
Yeah, right.
Max
in
plays
no
white,
way.
Ben plays black. Nothing like that.
Nothing like that. Opposite color pairings.
I will say that there is a lot of research that shows that men define friendships through shared activities.
Yes.
And so if you're looking for bros for whatever reason, whatever thing, if you're finding something to do with them, you're probably in a pretty good place. I will say that as someone who definitely has some social anxiety, a lot of times when I'm in a new situation, what I struggle with most is what am I going to do when I get there? Like, what's the script? What is the script of how do I get there? And even if I go to a Magic event, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. And so, if you're really struggling with how do I even interact with the large group, I would say, choose a more structured event where, you go into, a Magic event, you check in, you say, hey, I'm going to, do this, and then you just go meet each of your opponents, you play each of your games, you're a friendly, kind person to each of them, maybe you get someone's number, and you're friends with them later. Yeah. If it's the gym, then it could be a situation where, okay, you go to the gym, you get a good workout in, you have to work in with someone, you end up chatting with them. Okay, sure, you're being a little friendly, go at the same time the next day, see the same person.
Or maybe you stand next to the same person at the gym's class or whatever the next, couple of times. You're going to start talking to them. So,
I mean, if you have a script for just what you're trying to do when you get into a new place, I think that is good and can make you feel a little bit more confident in what you're doing, rather than feeling like you're going into a large group where you just have to talk to someone, and that's overwhelming, like a large party.
Yeah, and I think that I'm drawn to think about here. Just came to me was, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's the Dr. Seuss quote, of, do what you think matters, because the people who matter won't mind, and the people who mind don't really matter anyway.
Yeah.
And it's close enough to what the actual quote is.
Be who you are and say what you feel.
Yeah.
Sounds right.
Yeah. I think that there's some level of, if I can speak to this, like being authentic to oneself, and I mean, if you don't want to be there for the right reasons, don't be there. But if you're trying to go make new friends and to engage in a new activity that you enjoy and all of those things, and you just be your authentic self, other people that are doing the same thing will notice you. And you'll notice them. And you'll gravitate to each other organically. And so I think that, my coming from this perspective of what's something that I can say, what's something I can share on this podcast, that it would be advice for an individual. Now that I've put all of the caveats aside of, I'm assuming that you're this kind of good person and you're doing all of these things, then I would say, be the kind of person that stays after the class to help the teacher put in the chairs. Be the kind of person that helps someone else carry their load out or in. Be the one that volunteers to help set up the schedule, or to bring the primary dish instead of the cookies you bought at the grocery store.
Yeah,
for the potluck. Understand that you're not always going to get the same amount back from the group that you give in.
Yeah.
And no one is. And so the world is made better by the people that tend to put in more than they expect to get out. And I can also say, from my anecdotal experience, I think that the kind of people that preach that does pay dividends back are right. They're onto something there.
Yeah, and I will say, I really like what you said about almost like the keeping score thing, where if you get stuck in, well, this person didn't text me first, I'm always texting them first. I mean, you don't know exactly what's going on in their life. It's messy, and if you want a relationship with them, yeah, you should text them. And maybe you're the leader in that relationship because you end up doing that. And yeah, it might not feel the best sometimes, but again, kind of like what Ben said, the world is sort of designed for people who, give a little bit more than they get. Though there are definitely people who get more than they give.
Yeah. And I think that the things that we can control individually are whether or not we want to continue to contribute to those people, or do we want to take our community and do what we can within our own means to make it look as
better.
Best as we can.
Yeah.
So we just wrote down things like demonstrating kindness, being accurate, honest, and fair in your social gatherings. I think that it's the pedantic person in me doesn't want to label anybody as this paragon of a man that you should be, right?
It's okay to have, someone you look up to.
Yeah,
but to say that someone is perfect is probably not accurate.
Yeah, but I think that we all can think of men that we've encountered in our lives, whether it's within our own family groups, or whether they were a teacher or a coach or just a guy that, is socially involved in the thing that you're doing. We can all think of guys that we have encountered that held the group together. The kinds of people that we all know had the best interest of everybody there in mind. And I think that for me, when you had said before, you wonder with what am I going to do when I get there? What's the script? I think the easiest way, I think in that way a lot too. I think a lot of us do. And the inner communications major in me from my undergraduate is jumping at the script theory is it's a whole thing. But this idea that we participate in scripts, I think, is so helpful often to conceptualize. For me, when I'm feeling that way, one of the things that I do is recognize that I'm putting on the script of being that person. Right? I think that in a lot of ways, when I was working in the schools, I was, shout out Mr. Weber, my science teacher, my physics teacher in high school. If I didn't know what to do when a situation was moving towards like crisis or something like that, working in a group setting, if I didn't know how to respond to a young man who was sharing something emotionally that maybe I was taken aback by or something like that, being Mr. Weber was in the back of my mind, what would he have said? How would he have made me feel? And I had a few others. Shout out Mr. Gavin as well. But in a lot of ways, I think that it's, there's so many good quotes on it. But I think I trust in our audience. I think I trust in a lot of men that I encounter. All of us know a good guy.
Yeah.
Be like him. You know, that's a lot of that's short advice for a lot of things.
Be like him, but also be your own hero.
Yeah.
In a way, where you want to take the aspects of certain guys, and then also be like, you know what, I'm my own person. I have my own confidence, and that is beautiful, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the interesting thing about how beautiful humans are, as when observed as a group, is we are all of these little derivations from a template in so many different ways, and the template gets fuzzier and fuzzier as you move around and get further and further from each other, and then it gets more clear and more clear as we get hyper specific into our interest groups and our creeds and our communities. But those variations that still pop up in every single cookie that's cut out of the same cookie cutter are fascinating.
Yeah. Should we move on to our next segment?
Yeah, I think so. You had wanted to share about something.
Yeah, I wanted to know what happened to group therapy.
Yeah, what happened to group therapy? If we had a soundboard, this would be a great time for the soundboard.
Soundboard to be like,
what's up with that? Like, or something.
Yeah. Someday. So I guess to me, I feel like when I was in school, I had kind of thought, yeah, there's individual therapy, there's group therapy. I hadn't been to therapy yet, and I do feel like nowadays, if you say I'm going to therapy, there's no question about what you're doing. You're going to see an individual therapist to talk to that person for an hour about whatever. That's clearly like what's going on. So I mean, I'm not entirely sure why that is the case. Sometimes I feel like if I'm posting about I'm looking for an individual therapist on like a networking group, I'll get 30 responses. But if I post about looking for a group, I might get like 2 responses. Which to be fair, there's more people in a group than there are generally. But so I will say that if you're someone with social anxiety, systematic desensitization is the concept of being gradually exposed to the thing that you're afraid of until you're not afraid of it anymore. And group therapy is a place to handle social anxiety. You go there,
it's designed to be the safe space to do that.
You share about your feelings. Other people say, no, you're not crazy. That's fine. I felt that way too.
That happened to me.
Yeah. And you move on. But it feels like nowadays there's so much individual therapy that group therapy just doesn't seem to be happening, which is somewhat confusing to me.
At least not in the ways that it used to be, or at least my education informed me that it used to be done. And I think that there's a lot of factors. It's a multifaceted thing. And one of my first darts on the board is for answering what happened to it is COVID. I think we had a pandemic that forced everybody to be more isolationist individually in their behaviors. And when I think about COVID, I think about the Great Depression. And I think about that because I grew up my entire childhood. I had grandparents that had lived through the Great Depression. And in so many subtle ways, throughout my life and being very involved with, especially with my grandmother, so many of her behaviors were explained either by herself or by other people when she wasn't in the room as holdovers or remnants from her having lived through the Great Depression, particularly around cooking food, how much to have for everybody, and worries about finances that she had. And that there were so many little ways in life that explained entirely seemingly unrelated things, like why does grandma hide Snickers bars in all of the furniture of her house as her mind is also declining? Well, she's hoarding food. She's lived through intense food scarcity before. And I think about that so much in the context of COVID as one of these things that collectively we as a society all lived through. and I can give you one right now. Everybody interacts with toilet paper differently than they did before 2019. And nobody's buying more of it. No, it's not like that inelastic demand really changed all of that much, right? But without the events of COVID, right?
People wouldn't have thought about the toilet paper shortage.
People don't think about toilet paper shortage, right? It's one of these immutable things that we all as a culture went through, and certainly changed minor behaviors around us. I mean, look at the way it accelerated technology use around Zoom, Twitch, the live video conferencing enabling things, and then the whole movement of work from home and all of these things happened. And to me, I think it's inescapable that the idea of group therapy was certainly impacted by just the overall convenience of being able to meet with your therapist without even leaving your house over video conferencing.
Yeah.
Changes the dynamic in the landscape. But I don't think that's the only thing that should go on the board. The next thing that I would throw at the board there is from my anecdotal personal experience of having worked in several different levels of care, from day treatment, outpatient programs to intensive inpatient programs, and as well at a homeless shelter for a while, was the most experience that I got in leading groups and seeing group therapy done. And my takeaway from that is a little bit shooting from the hip, but also informed by my education and anecdotal experience. It seems like in a lot of ways our field as therapists has really turned group therapy into this thing that is useful in institutionalized settings.
But isn't
and
something that someone would go to a private practice?
Exactly.
Otherwise.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's a piece of like the financial pressures on the industry too, that group therapy might be a little bit more intensive to recruit patients, to retain patients, to maintain scheduling, and there's insurance reimbursement rate pieces. Yeah. There's just a lot of...
Which is already a headache for individual therapy for private practice therapists and institutions, but then group therapy is its own different beast when it comes to the financial aspects.
Yeah.
And so that's a barrier, that's another dart on the board of therapists have that barrier, as well as if you're seeing a decline in groups being run, right, that means that there's also a decline in the availability for new incoming therapists to get the experience to do that, to feel confident enough to then go off to their private practice and start a group.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that it's a multifaceted answer that's just unsatisfying, but overall it does seem like we're doing group therapy less and differently than we used to.
And I think that if we were doing more consistently group therapy for people who are experiencing things like social anxiety, and if individual therapists were doing an assessment and said, I have social anxiety, this client, and they'd be like, okay, great, I'm going to send you to group therapy. You're not staying here. It's better for you. We might be seeing a little bit better results.
Yeah.
And I do think that I wish clinicians would not shy away from group therapy so much. I wish that some of these, barriers in the way were taken away. But I also think that there are groups out there, and every once in a while I'm hearing about them, and I'm like, wow, this person's doing group intervention. I'm feeling that's awesome that they're doing that, and I'm really hoping that people can find them. So I think that you can definitely look for groups also in psychology today. But I really just wanted to bring up this topic because I do feel like when we talk about therapy, there is an assumption that it's individual. And I feel like, when we even talked about, at the beginning of our show, like, this is not therapy, go find a therapist. Psychology is where you find a therapist. It's very much like, hey, you're going for individual services.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someone is needing group services. To
be somewhat fair as well to ourselves and to acknowledge the general flow of a patient's experience through mental health care, my understanding of Irving Yalom's prescribed best practices for running a group involve the therapist individually vetting each member before forming a group. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that your group therapist has to be a therapist that you have seen for months and months or years. But it does mean that they probably have to see you at least one time individually to make sure that you're a right fit for the group and that the group is a right fit for you.
Yeah.
I think is a better way of saying that, actually, more often than not.
Well, I think that is absolutely an issue that Yalom talks about in his theory and practice of group psychotherapy, is making sure that, you know, you're doing an interview with all group participants beforehand and just assessing, you know, what is going on with them. Making sure that what they're going to get from the group is what they're looking for, and that the group that you're trying to run is an appropriate fit for them.
Yeah. So with that said, group therapy is perhaps not as populous as it was previously, but still something that we acknowledge is incredibly helpful, and maybe even I would go so far as to personally say maybe something that we hopefully see more of in the future.
Yeah.
And certainly not a complete replacement for third space or for individual relationships, right? We've talked about individual therapy, we've talked about group therapy, we've talked about group social settings, but to be a socially healthy man, I would argue, I'm going to come from the space I'm arguing, you should have close interpersonal friendships. I don't think that I don't have in mind like a magic number of how many good friends that you should have. I think that many of us know the answer, just in whether or not do you know whether or not you have enough, or too many.
Well,
right?
I think I would say, is there someone that you can call if you're having a hard time?
Yeah.
Is the question that I would want to ask, and if that one person isn't available, who else do you call?
Yeah.
It's kind of a good question,
Yeah.
I think, to try and address here. I think if we're moving on to the next
Yeah,
segment,
I think so.
You can...
If that's all right.
Yeah, of course. You can build those relationships at a third place where, you know, you meet someone there, you become friends with them, and then you're kind of in the group. And, you know, eventually you may find pieces of, like, group chats. Maybe they're in a group chat. Maybe you go hang out with their friends. Maybe there's, you know, a few people, you know, at your gym who always, you know, are on, like, the bench presses on the same time. I don't know what exactly your gym is going to be like. But, you know, there's a lot of different ways I think that you can, you know, get into, you know, more close friendships. I do think that a lot of people have, like, superficial friendships where they just enjoy, like, doing something together, and they never address, like, the more difficult parts of their life. And I do think that to be emotionally healthy, you just need to be able to talk about the more difficult things when you need to. I think that you know in your heart when you need to do that.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me is, you know, trying to conceptualize, you know, the men that we're talking to as well. I want to acknowledge those that might be thinking, you know, when I say you need somebody that, you know, no matter what the activity is, but you need friends that you can just, the two of you, go fishing together. Or, right, you still need those things. In fact, you know, based on the data, as we mentioned before, men tend to form relationships by engaging in shared activity. So, you know, let's doing the example of fishing. Say you find a fishing club because you want to get into fishing, but you know you were never taught how, and so you find a group of people that fish together. And now, this is where I think a lot of people online, self-help gurus and whatnot will tell you just go find a third space, and then they stop there. And what I think is a worthwhile suggestion is recognize the people that are there that you maybe do want to spend more time with. And so using the fishing example and seeing it all the way through, find that guy or that gal that's there that you wouldn't mind fishing, just the two of you. Go get some more practice before the next, you know, fishing tournament that you're all engaging in or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that ends up resulting in the relationship where I think that it can sound scary to some guys that you know, might sound like we're saying you should go have a deep conversation every single time you're out on the lake. I don't think that.
I think that if you're just having a moment where you're having a memory with each other of this one time that you were fishing and then someone fell in the lake, you know, you can joke about that. Yeah, there's a lot of things.
To me, it's the availability. I think it's so easy within our culture and within our society to set up our schedules and our lives, especially without this third space. We lose this availability of if something does come up in my life that I don't understand how I feel about it or I need to talk it out. Do I have somebody that I can talk it out with? And do I have a space where I know I'll have their attention?
And is that person not my romantic partner?
And is that person not my romantic partner?
Because, yes, obviously you want to have a good romantic relationship, and we've talked about that. But
good kinship relationships as well. I would say, as somebody that feels like they have a pretty good relationship with their siblings, and sometimes it's been stronger and sometimes it's been weaker, right? A brother, many of us that are listening or here are brothers, but a brother isn't always the same as a friend that you didn't grow up with.
For example, what if it's family drama that's going on,
exactly,
and maybe your brother is a part of it that you're in disagreement with, and I can't imagine my brother being in that place, but I think that it's important for you to be able to have a few different places that are independent from each other to call.
Yeah, and I think as somebody who's a proponent of a healthy skepticism of authority, it's good to have multiple different places that are in different authority structures, right? Your siblings are in an authority structure familially with you, right? Your coworkers, right? Maybe you have a coworker, right? Because we haven't really touched on it that much, but you can become a good, close personal friend with someone at work.
What?
We're doing that.
Well, we did do that.
We did do that. And that person will have a different hierarchy of authorities that they're involved in that will inform the kind of counsel and advice that they can give you that would be different than a brother. Both of them are valuable.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't know. I feel like this is kind of building to the concept that I have of the committee.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I talk about guys who are struggling with dating, that they need to have a committee of people to show their profile to talk to about messages and matches and about dates, someone to call after a date.
Find you a friend that's good at taking pictures.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that you kind of need a committee just like for life. I mean, I was at a wedding this past weekend, and of course, there's groomsmen and bridesmaids at a wedding. And, I look at that, collection of people, and I'm like, I think that is that person's committee right there. To have a healthy committee means that you're probably going to be able to, get whatever it is that you want, whether it is starting a business, find a romantic partner, or do anything like that.
Yeah. I think that you want to find people that are going to be willing to share with you even when their opinion isn't comfortable. And I think that there's something to be said about the fact that we as human beings need to practice being in relationship with one another, which to me means that in order to have a good friendship and a lasting friendship and a friendship that is the kind where you can say difficult things to one another, I think that's why I think there's so much merit to this. Men form bonds by doing things together. If I can figure out how to keep my head level, and you show me that you keep your head level, and that we can keep the friendship intact while fixing a car,
yes,
I think that we can keep the friendship intact when you disagree with me about a career option.
And we're doing difficult feedback.
Exactly.
I think that today people are very emotionally avoidant. They don't want to have difficult conversations for a variety of reasons. I think it's the most common reason. Well, I think that it's one of the most fundamental problems that I see people going through in therapy. And I think that if you have a strong social relationship, you're going to be in a situation where, you can give and take difficult feedback and not have your feelings hurt and still move on with that friendship.
Yeah. And I think that a protective factor in, right, as we've said, having several close friends is important. And, from different aspects of your life and things too, they can certainly overlap. But also, it's preventative or protective for yourself that if one of those relationships does get strained, maybe sometimes that feedback was a misstep or out of bounds.
Yeah.
Right? You have other places. This isn't the only authority. You're not like joining a cult. This is the one guy that you're listening to. Right? You have multiple voices of counsel that by practicing cultivating those relationships and watering that garden of friendships that you have into several flowers that make a bouquet, you can be confident that even if one of them isn't shining as brightly in the sun today, that the bouquet is still healthy and intact and capable of being a fine centerpiece on your table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about the thing that we haven't talked about, and I'm just going to ram right through the door with it. Internalized homophobia in our culture. Preventing men from having deep, meaningful, close relationships. It's not the only thing, for sure. But I would put forward the argument that, in particular, speaking as a millennial man that was raised by boomers, I think there's a lot intergenerationally here of generations of men that maybe grew up with emotionally unavailable or emotionally uneducated or emotionally damaged by things like war, fathers that then is met with this, so they don't know what to do when they have a confusing thought or they have an emotion that is difficult, and you combine that with a pervasive culture of homophobia, of xenophobia together, you end up with this lack of conversation across our cultural zeitgeist for decades at this point about what male friendships are and what they look like, because there's so many people with that fear of social rejection. If you come out and say, yeah, I want to have friendships that are as deep and as powerful and as goofy and silly, as a romantic relationship. Or the example I was going to go with is I think I've met a lot of people that say they don't have friends like they used to when they were a kid growing up, when they were, in elementary school or middle school or high school.
Well, I think that's because gendered behavior.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that as guys get older, there's a drive to be more independent,
Mm-hmm.
and that somehow if you are not completely self-reliant, that you're weak
Mm-hmm.
in some way, or gay, dare I
Mm-hmm.
say. And I do think that internalized homophobia is this idea that you're worried about being seen as gay. And that if that happens, God forbid,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like if you tell another guy about your feelings, somehow you've given him a sexual favor,
Mm-hmm.
and no, that's not real.
Yeah,
that's just
or
not real.
somehow you're in danger of, right? And I think it comes from all of these places, right? It's misinformation around homosexuality that so there's this underlying, there's this snake underneath the table, essentially, of this myth that has gone unchallenged for a long time and is getting challenged a lot more recently, that you could become gay, right? That you could just be made gay by doing effeminate things or
by talking to men about feelings, because
Exactly.
that's the only thing. But then this results in women being pissed off at guys because they're the only people who listen to men's feelings, and then they're like, God damn it.
And I think, one of the things that I'm thinking of is for the people that might say, well, I don't know how much our culture really is anti-gay. Look at how much progress that the LGBTQ community
this isn't even about being anti-gay.
Yeah.
This is about men who are just in their life. They are just going about their life, and they can't make friends because they're like, well, if I talk to that guy in the sauna, he's shirtless, so I'll be gay.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking
But
about.
yeah, exactly. And I'm saying, coming from the perspective of, I remember being a young man and how controversial it was when we were having conflict in the Middle East, that our president, George Bush, the younger one, was holding hands with and physically touching, an Arab man, and that made the national news that by him engaging in that culture's understood and appreciated, right? In many Arab cultures, it's totally normal for platonic heterosexual men to hold each other's hands, put their arms around each other's shoulders, and kiss each other on the cheek when greeting, when walking through the park, things like that.
That's what you're even supposed to do.
Yeah.
In fact, if the president at the time did not do those things, he probably would have got a worse deal, because he would have been seen as very impolite.
But I remember the culture warriors of the time on the 5 o'clock evening news clutching their pearls at this, this guy who had worked so long to create this image of himself as a Texas rancher, would be so effeminate in all of these ways. And I remember being a confused young man that was like, but I was probably 8. I put my arm around my friend's shoulder when we are on the playground, and I think that there's just this, I think what I'm getting at is I grieve in some ways the loss of opportunity for so many men across multiple generations, and are continuing to experience this world they couldn't have lived, that they're not getting to live in, because we have these weird, archaic, I would call them weird, archaic attitudes towards gender and sexuality and sexual expression and friendship and all of these things, when ultimately I think that, if something feels good and it feels right, do that thing. Be your authentic, genuine self.
Yeah.
Hug your friends. Love them. Tell them that you love them. That's okay.
Yeah.
You can be that guy. That's normal. I think that it's sad that I even feel the need to share that because I know that there are people out there that haven't heard that message.
Well, I think that some people don't even think about it. They're just
Yeah.
like, no, it's weird to talk to a dude in the sauna. That's
Yeah.
the only thing that they can think of.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess, like, you know, as someone who is bisexual, like, obviously it's okay to like dudes if that is the case. And also, if you don't like dudes, you gotta have dude friends because sometimes I mean, I can't imagine not having other men to be around to do things that I don't know.
I think for me, one of the biggest things is I don't always, not every day, do I wake up and say, "Wow, I want to be a better person than I was." But I feel as though I reap the benefits of enjoying a life where I have surrounded myself with close interpersonal friendships with people that I stand to learn a lot from repeatedly, and I hope that they gain the benefit of my presence that in the same ways that they benefit me, and that we all make each other better. We all look out for one another, and we all deeply care about the success as defined by each other, of each other. Yeah.
I think that I do, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, thank you. I'm glad that you feel the benefit of that because I deeply feel the benefit of extending that.
I suppose that's why we're here.
I suppose that's why we're here. And speaking of why we're here, perhaps that's a good way to segue to our ending quote.
Yeah.
I want to leave us before we get to our conclusions about the conversation with a quote from Steve Jobs, which is I alluded to as we started our conversation today. But I'm just going to read this email that he sent. I've seen a few memes. I'm not sure this was actually sent from an iPhone, but the first way I saw this was in email format sent from iPhone at the bottom, and I thought that was interesting. Steve Jobs wrote in an email before stepping down from his company while he was battling cancer, "I didn't invent the language or mathematics I used. I make little of my own food and none of my own clothes. Everything I do depends on other members of our species and the shoulders that we stand on. And a lot of us want to contribute something back to our species and add to something to the flow. It's about trying to express something in the only way that most of us know how, because we can't write Bob Dylan songs or Tom Stoppard plays. We try to use the talents we do have to express our deep feelings, to show our appreciation of all the contributions that came before us, and to add something to that flow. That is what has driven me."
You know, I'm really left with a sense of how we need to work together as a species and as men just to make things happen. And I think that it can be very difficult to work with other people. I think that even I will get tired of working with other people on certain things. You really want to do things a certain way. But I think that when people come together, that's when truly great things happen. Yeah, we have, you know, individual people who've done really good things, but if people work together, I don't know. I think that that is when good things happen. And that's why I think that you need friends. And that's why I need friends.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that I think about when I read that is I'm reminded of one of the things that helped me especially when I was working in the schools, keep in perspective what the meaning was and what I was there for. And that is to me, in put into my own words, is I don't think that I'm gonna cure cancer in this lifetime, and I don't know that I've met the person that will cure cancer in this lifetime, but maybe by doing some of the things that I do, like teaching kids how to fish at a local park, maybe I'll teach a young man whose son will one day grow up to cure cancer. And I might not know the ways that all of the benefit by pouring back into my community that it will spread out. But I'm generally assured in the idea that I know that from experience, the times that people have helped me has helped me more than they would ever know. And so I like to rest with the knowledge that I probably have done some good somewhere that's been helpful to somebody.
I think that you have to.
Yeah. You got anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I think we've left it all on the table.
I do as well. So hopefully you find yourselves a table to get around and to talk about social health And certainly leave comments below if you're encountering this on YouTube. Otherwise, we'll be running a rerun of this episode again next week. Find us again in 2 weeks.
At noon, our new time.
Our new time at noon, where we will have essentially a summation of this whole season. Hope to see you there. Thanks very much for watching. Have a great day. If you or someone you know is in crisis, don't forget to call 988. Did I forget anything else?
No, I don't
This
think
episode
so.
has been brought to you by the letter Q.